Hello and welcome to It's Your Time You're Wasting with
Me, David Didow.
and me, Martin Robinson. And it's a lovely day here in London. How is it in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a bit the heat's broken,
Yeah,
but it's still rather pleasant.
good, good. It's
Yeah,
still it's
it's
still
sort of.
hot though.
Oh no, it's not. I'm not. I'm very comfortable. It's sort of low twenties.
Okay. We're going up to I don't know 25 or something like that.
On Tuesday, I was driving to Manchester, and my
Ooh,
car told me it was 35 degrees in the drive-up.
yeah, not good. Not good.
Luckily, I was I was ruining the environment with my air conditioning.
Well, you have to, don't you? I don't mean you have to ruin the environment. Well, I suppose if you're in a
What?
car, you're doing all sorts of damage anyway, aren't you?
Yeah, I know. I was really rubbing it in with the aircon.
Yeah, you're Greta Thunberg's nightmare, I've heard.
I am. She sometimes stands outside my front door with a little placard,
Quite
and I
right.
feel, yeah, I know. And I say, Greta, you're right.
In
I
fact,
have got a hybrid. Does that help?
a hybrid what?
Car,
Car. Yeah.
car, Martin.
Not hybrid
A
Greta
hybrid
Thunberg.
Greta. I haven't got any. Greta doesn't do those things.
No, she's
So
organic.
I've made that up. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
full
Yeah,
full fat.
yeah. Well, and on that note, now, the other thing, can I just say, please, if you're listening to us, watching us,
Subscribe.
or both, look, I've made something here. Look,
Oh gosh,
like and
did you make that?
subscribe. Look at that. Isn't that
I can
amazing?
see the bits of glue.
I
That's really
can do that
beautiful.
again. There it is.
Do it
Like and
again.
subscribe.
Yeah, no, do because I mean, what's wrong with you? Just do it.
We're nearly on 1,000
I
on
know we've been
YouTube.
nearly on 1,000 for weeks and weeks and weeks, and
No, we're getting there. We're
it's
getting
fine.
there every week. We get
We get one more a week, don't we?
no, we get more, slightly more than that.
Yeah,
A little dribble
Trip.
of dribble of subscribers. I can't even
Yeah.
say that.
What a beautiful metaphor that is.
what are we speaking about today?
We're speaking about mental health, Martin.
Oh,
We're speaking
yes.
about the fact that there's fairly there's fairly objective evidence that there does appear to be a mental health crisis. I don't think anyone's seriously saying no, it's all fine. Although we can talk about that too. But there's pretty good evidence out there that young people are having a really tough time, and we're going to talk about what schools can do and what maybe they shouldn't do about
Great.
that to help the situation. Can schools solve the mental health crisis? What do you
And
think? Can they?
well,
Should they?
if
Could
if
they?
if there is a mental health crisis, and we're talking in young people particularly,
Yeah.
I think figures
We don't
go
want.
some of them around teenage years, but
Hmm.
up to 16, I think. But then there's also figures that take us up to 24 and 35, things like
Yeah.
that about young people.
Schools can't do much about those people, can they?
Well, perhaps they've taken part in forming part of the mental health crisis anyway. I mean, that's another thing. If
Well, and interestingly, people in that age group are becoming. Some of them are becoming teachers.
well, so that does that make it worse? That
Well,
they
it might not.
destroyed
It
by the system coming back into it.
Maybe it makes it better. I think lots of people, myself
Okay.
included, were motivated to become teachers to improve the experience that we had. That was certainly part
Okay.
of my motivation. I can't really do a worse job than the one I experienced. So maybe some younger teachers are thinking, oh yeah, school is a bit brutal and a bit unforgiving and not very kind place to be. I, as someone who has a lived experience of what the consequences of that might be, maybe has some solutions to offer. So that could be really positive.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing to consider, the other side of it, is that if you're leading a school, I think more and more you have to be mindful of the well-being and mental health of your staff. I mean, you
Right.
should
As
always
well.
be that, but I think that there's an increasing number of teachers with diagnoses of mental health issues, and that then just uh, complicates the landscape, perhaps.
Okay. So there. Let's get some facts and figures at this. I mean, I looked into getting some numbers.
Yeah,
NHS England, which is now defunct, but They
Yeah.
came up with these figures in 2023. About 1 in 5 children, young people aged 8 to 25 years, had a probable mental health disorder. This
Yeah.
is 20.3% of 8 to 16-year-olds, 23.3% of 17 to 19-year-olds, and 21.7% of 20 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
So that's a sizable number, about 1 in 5, I suppose,
Yeah, it's pretty
of
significant. Yeah. What do they say anything about what kinds of mental health issues that would include, Martin?
I expect they do, but whether I've got the exact figures of those things, but the wording of probable mental health disorder gives
Yes.
us some sort of doubt, I suppose, about the exact mental health disorders they might be taking
Yeah.
on here.
They've also got some stats on bullying as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
So children aged 11 to 16 with a probable mental health disorder were 5 times more likely than those who haven't to be bullied.
Hmm.
So 36.9% of them felt they were being bullied in person, and an additional 11% online. So that's very sad. Does that imply? And there's an interesting sort of question here. Does it imply that those children are being bullied because of their mental health issues,
Right.
or because of their mental issues, do they perceive that they're being bullied more?
Well, you're talking about correlation
Yeah, I
and
am. Yeah.
causation here. Again, you can't tell. I mean, there is
No, but
there
it's
is
a valid
evidence
question
that
to ask, isn't it?
if, and I'm going to use the word neurodiverse here because it
Okay,
it
do
catches
do.
all a large number of different disorders and various
Mm,
other things. But neurodiverse children do tend to get bullied more than those who aren't neurodiverse. Now, whether that, I think there's evidence that mental health issues do occur more with neurodiverse
yeah.
people than those who aren't. So you could say there's a correlation there. But I mean, that doesn't make the bullying any
No,
better.
no,
Oh,
no.
it's
Of course not.
okay.
Of
You're
course.
targeting it.
Yeah. You're not. Yeah, yeah. I've just found on that NHS England site. There's specific figures on young people with eating disorders.
Hmm.
So 12.5% of 17 to 19-year-olds have eating disorders. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, many more young women than young men.
Yeah. Why?
So
Why is this growing though?
yeah,
Is it because of
so
what? And what can schools do about it? There we go.
right, exactly. Is it so? I think that why it's growing is arguably there's I don't have any data on this, but I've read arguments about the idea that things like issues like self harm seem to be more prevalent, partly because young people are more likely to encounter, perhaps online, other young people talking about the fact that they self harm and sort of sharing tips and ideas about how to do it safely. And so, whenever the argument is that whenever something is normalized, then things that we might not have considered suddenly become possibilities. So that might be feeding into it.
Yeah. There's also the thing with self harm. It's because people now are more likely to talk about it rather than hide it away
Yeah,
that we know more about it. Just because in the past perhaps people were doing it but not saying or not
yeah, that's
sharing it.
absolutely true. That's absolutely true. That might be the case. But it seems, again, I don't have any data on this, so I'm kind of reaching a little bit. But it does seem that it's reasonably normal, especially for young women, to engage in self harm.
Hmm. Again,
And
I
that's
can't comment on that because you haven't got the
no,
figures, so I don't
no,
know.
no. But so from my own sort of experience, it does seem to be more prevalent than is healthy, than is desirable, and that seems very sad. And it's kind of interesting some of the motivations that some young people talk about for why they do things like self harm. Like it's a mechanism for controlling something that is uncontrollable. So other feelings that they might have, sort of mental health issues that they might have. There's an exercise of control with inflicting a small amount of pain on your own body that enables you to maybe deal with the things that you can't deal with more productively, or maybe productive, perhaps the wrong word there, but in some way.
Or it's a release of
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing.
But we seem to be almost saying, "Hey, it's fine," by saying things like that. It's not fine. I don't think it works as a release rather than a cry, because people need to control their lives in other ways and feel that they have control over their lives. And perhaps there's something going on there that young people don't feel they have control. And it's not just young people who self-harm, by the way,
No,
of
of
course.
course
But
it isn't.
if you're in a situation where you feel self-harming is a release of something, then perhaps there's something else going on beyond just
Oh, of
mental
course.
health. And mental health is, I mean, like all sorts of health, it's health in the world, isn't it? I mean, it's the
Yeah,
pollutants that are happening around us cause us to react in certain ways. Well, perhaps that's the same in the way that culture and society and school affects us, and
yeah,
there are ways that we have to deal with it or want to deal with it in some sort of trying to reach some sort of homeostasis. I don't know,
yeah.
to
No,
try
I
to
think
try
that's
and regulate yourself, to get yourself into a place where you feel, for this minute, for now, and for the foreseeable future, I can
yeah.
control myself in this, and I can live in this way. I want to try.
You were
You
going to
no, sorry,
share.
you
You
carry on.
shared with me an article that was written earlier this year in January by. I'm probably going to say his name wrong now, but how
Phonergy
do you? Fonergy. I was
or
going to say his
Fonagy.
name.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know. It's F O
I was going to say
N
Fonagy.
A G Y. Fonagy,
Yeah, Peter
Fonagy. You say
Fonagy.
Fonagy, I say Fonagy. Go on.
I say Fonagy. Yeah.
Fonagy. Ah, of
Well, who
course.
knows? Who knows? Well, maybe Professor Peter Fonagy or Fonagy or whatever he's called. Maybe get in touch and let us know,
I
or
don't think he
someone.
will now. I
Maybe his
think he's
mum.
switched off. He's switched off and cancelled his subscription or whatever.
Oh no.
He's
Well,
unfollowed us.
anyway, he's the head of the Division of Psychology and Languages Science at UCL, and his argument is that the mental health crisis is real, and that it can't really be addressed without doing some fundamental rethinking about how we support young people's development. What I mean, tell us a little bit about Professor Peter
Right. Well, he is
and why we
senior.
should care about his opinion.
He's senior national clinical advisor on children and young people's mental health for NHS England, or was,
Mm.
because NHS England are no more. Program director, as you said, of the UCL Partners Integrated Mental Health Program, and has chaired major national expert groups, including two NICE guideline development groups on childhood and adolescent depression, and the
So
attachment of
he
children
knows
in
his
care.
onion.
He knows, he's certainly a lot of experience in this area. And he starts in the article: the current crisis is the product of decades long changes in how young people are raised, educated, and supported. Changes that have profoundly reshaped the mental health landscape. And I think that gives us a clue as
Yeah,
to why certain things might be happening now rather than they have done in the past. That there
yeah,
are changes that we as school practitioners, etc., have taken part in.
yeah,
So what are schools doing in the meantime to deal with the mental health crisis, and is it working?
yeah. So he doesn't really get into the details about what schools are doing, but anecdotally, schools are becoming increasingly sort of mental health one-stop shops. We know there's a funding crisis. We know it's really, really hard to get referrals to CAMS, and it can often feel for staff working in schools that they're the only point of contact for young people in distress, and that's a really, really challenging and difficult situation. And so, increasingly, schools have been offering mindfulness and wellbeing workshops. Um, bits of cognitive behavioral therapy, breathing exercises, all sorts of therapeutic interventions which are very well intentioned and maybe not always having the effects or the impacts that we might hope or want them to have.
Yeah, this reminds me of a certain head teacher of a certain public school.
Oh,
I'm not
right.
going to name, so don't make me. Who
When you
was
say public school, do you mean a posh old public
a
school?
posh old British public school? Yes, not the
Yeah, yeah.
American type. And
No.
he sort of starts his talks when he gave talks. He says, "Right, everyone, close your eyes and breathe in
Yeah,
and out
yeah,
and in." And you do that for about a minute.
yeah.
By which time
And he'd
everyone was
normally
very
he'd normally take his
irritated.
shoes off, wouldn't he?
Everyone's very irritated by the end of that,
Yeah, wound
and
up to the
wind up
max.
and
Yeah,
hardly relaxed at all.
I know, very tense going
Yeah,
into the rest of the talk. Yeah, yeah. Bless him. That was quite a good impersonation there,
of
Martin. You might
whoever
not
he
have
happens
named
to
him.
be. Yeah.
You might not have
So
named him, but there's a prize. The first person
no.
who comments on who they think, any correct guesses on who Martin was doing.
So
We won't
mindfulness.
reveal the answer. We'll just send them a prize
So
of
mindfulness.
our
Just tell
choosing.
us about mindfulness. What is mindfulness?
Yeah, what is it? So at its sort of most basic level, it's being conscious of the moment around you. It's really thinking about. This is why it's kind of associated with breathing. Lots of the ideas come from meditation exercises, which are very very ancient. Many of them
Can
been
I
around
can I
for
just say
obviously.
breathing is a good idea though, isn't it?
Breathing is a great idea. Breathing is a great idea. Most people manage it without having to do specific exercises, though, don't we?
Right. Is there a thing about controlling heart rate and things like
Yeah,
that associated
yeah,
with
there is.
breathing in certain
Yeah,
tempos
yeah,
and things? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely there is. And this is the the fact that breathing exercises through guided meditations have been around for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and people have practiced them to their benefit. Um, for a long, long time. And so it seems like, why wouldn't it be a good idea to tell young people and give them access to these kinds of processes to help them reflect on what they're experiencing and gain some control over what they were going through and to help regulate their mood and that kind of thing. Why wouldn't that be a good idea? And I think that's often where we are in a school setting.
So mindfulness was it came along like growth mindset. It was a big thing a couple of years ago or so, um, and it was something that some schools, not all schools by any means, some schools taught children in
Mm.
order that the child, and we go back to this thing about taking control, at some point could take control of anything that was overstressing them or whatever. Is that what it's about? So not to
Yeah.
something you use every day, but something you might use at a moment of need, or is it something that you should use every day?
Right. Okay. Well, I'll give you a sort of brief little explainer. So, like anything, even though we're seeing more of it now, schools there have been some schools using mindfulness for quite a long time. So its roots for a program called mindfulness based stress reduction go back to the 70s.
Hmm.
And that was initially a program that was designed for adults and started to be used in schools. So I think by the late 19s, early 2000s, we were seeing an increase of that kind of thing in some classrooms and a growing belief that the role of social and emotional learning, the various iterations of that, create really it seems like an easy win, a cheap, teachable, low risk way of equipping children with coping skills. So, early pilots of mindfulness in school were often sort of quite small scale and driven by people who are very enthusiastic and reported improvements in children's self-reports of well-being and classroom behaviour. So, we could caveat this by saying, we should be right to be suspicious of self-report, but nevertheless. And so this obviously aligns quite neatly with concerns about an interest in resilience and grit. Do you remember grit?
Mm.
That was quite
It's
popular.
coming back.
Self-regulation. Yeah, is it? Is it coming
It,
back?
it's just there has been murmurings at the DFE that grit is on its way back, but that's slightly
Dear.
different. Resilience is slightly different to mindfulness as such.
Well, I think there's a connection,
Okay.
and there's also a connection with character education and things like that.
Mm.
There's sometimes an overlap. So I think around about or sort of early 2010s, you've got organisations like the Mindfulness in Schools project, which is offering training to teachers and curriculum packages. I think there was one called Pause B for primary school students and Dot B for adolescents. So, unsurprisingly, the government's interested in that. DfE began funding research and trials, uh, culminating in the large-scale Education for Wellbeing program, which was launched in 2017. So, at the same time, mindfulness is finding its way into the PHSE curriculum.
Mm.
Um,
Doesn't
and,
everything?
and everything does eventually, but also into schools' behaviour policies. So you start seeing it crop up, on websites. This is one of the things we're doing. It starts cropping up with staff well-being as well,
Mm.
and increasingly becomes part of the furniture of what goes on in schools.
Right.
So what I should say before we move on is
Yeah.
that what's often
No.
glossed over is that the evidence base has never kept up with our enthusiasm for it. So, although there were early positive results from these small scale studies, larger scale evaluations, including the DFE's own trial, consistently found little or no benefit. So, more recent reviews have actually found increasingly concerns that mindfulness, when given by people who are not qualified professionals, actually might make things worse. And that's the bit that's potentially really problematic. Nobody's intending that, obviously. Anyone who's getting children to be more mindful and to practice breathing and to do CBT and all of these things is doing it with the very, very best of intentions. But I think we should be conscious of and concerned about the fact that we might inadvertently be making it harder for children to cope.
Why is it that schools always like something that seems cheap, as you say, and easy, as as
Yeah, I wonder
the way?
why.
No, but as the way. Oh, this must be it because like
Yeah,
growth mindset, like
yeah,
mindfulness, might whatever it happens to be, like all these things. Oh, this is the answer. It's cheap. It's
yeah,
easy. We can do it. We can deliver it very simply because it just needs one inset
yeah,
for an hour. Someone comes in, teaches it to teachers, then they off they go with their PowerPoints and their
yeah,
PSHE curriculum, and we've ticked that box, so we've done something, and we can say we have
yeah.
done that. All these
I think you've
things.
answered the question there, Martin. I
Yeah,
think it's that we've got a problem. We need to do something. This
this
is
is
something.
something.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
And
That's it.
and and I should caveat any sort of implied criticism here that we're not criticising qualified mental health professionals who are who are intervening with young people in ways which are, that they are qualified to do. We're not qualified to talk about that. What we're talking about is people who aren't qualified mental health professionals dealing with young people in schools, and that's maybe a different kettle of fish. And so, to sort of go to your question there, Martin, that we do these insets, we train staff up in these procedures, and then there's perhaps a bit of a misguided belief that we do know what we're talking about, that we are in some way qualified to say what should happen
Mm.
for people in distress.
The trouble is with teachers, of course, is that we're meant to be people who know
Yeah,
things, and therefore,
yeah,
and certainly if we're on a PSHE curriculum, which most of the time the teacher probably doesn't know. Sorry, those of you out there who are full-time PSHE
Yeah,
teachers, you can come back at me. But those I'm talking about, those of us who get
yeah,
the
yeah.
PowerPoint that morning and off we go.
Yeah,
You know,
I know,
the,
and there's a real sidebar here to have. Maybe it's a discussion for a program in the future that PHSE done well by a dedicated team is probably a great thing, but all too often it's delivered a little bit resentfully, perhaps, by people who are not qualified or knowledgeable about it, and that maybe it's a bad thing
yeah, yeah.
sometimes, at least. I've certainly experienced that. Sounds like you have too,
I
Martin, getting
couldn't
your
possibly
PowerPoint first
comment,
thing in
of
the
course,
morning.
you know. But what is going on in schools then? I mean, we're saying something about the professionalism of people. There is,
Mm.
I think, the idea now that a mental health specialist will be appointed to every school, or is
Yeah,
that's one of the things the government is talking about, that
it's
should
been
happen.
talked about and probably quite welcome. See, I mean, I guess the other argument would be maybe it'd be better to spend that money funding CAMS properly. Um,
Right, it's difficult, isn't it? Because schools are taking more and more of young
yeah,
people's time, and
okay.
in
Tell me what you
terms,
mean by that, Martin.
right, okay, my dad probably started school at 9 o'clock and finished at 3 o'clock and left school entirely at 14.
Yeah,
You know, now, I mean, I left school at 16,
me
and
too.
at three
We went
twenty.
back though, didn't we?
We went back at 3:20 on a weekday. That would be the end of my schooling, and what homework there was scant and but probably scarce because I didn't do it. But but things like
That's
that,
my suspicion, Martin.
perhaps it was said after all. But it
Yeah,
seems to
maybe.
be that schools take more and more. You're starting earlier. You're leaving school later.
Yeah.
And your dinner time is being reduced. Your holiday
Yeah.
times seemingly are being reduced, with
Are
whether it
they?
be extra lessons or you come in over the
Okay.
weekend or all these sorts of things.
I think those
Certainly
things are
during
optional
exam
though, aren't they?
periods and all that last minute cramming time and whatever it happens to be. There's a
Yeah.
suspicion that
Yeah.
children have less time to themselves. So even if they are doing things after school or whatever, it might be school clubs at school that are organised, or the parent takes them to some club somewhere if they're rich enough to go swimming and all these other
Yeah.
things. So a lot of the time that children have is quite organised for them.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
this,
interestingly, this is one of the things. This is one of the criticisms that Peter Fonagy makes
yeah.
in his article. The idea of what's also been called by people like Jonathan Haidt's safetyism.
Hmm.
The idea that we're so concerned about children playing independently that we have to organise and supervise all of their play. So, do you think schools are contributing to that, Martin?
I think the whole thing is it's I mean helicopter parenting. There's helicopter schooling as well, in that we're
Mm,
buzzing around them, telling them what is good for them. This is good for them. This is the important trajectory you've got to go on. And
yeah,
then society as a whole. So schools don't exist without the rest of it. We're
yeah,
saying to them that these exams are so important,
yeah.
so important for you, for your
Mm,
school, for your parents, for society as a whole. And then you leave school and find out actually your qualifications still don't get you a job necessarily. You've still got to do another few years, if you're the
right.
50% to go on to university. Then you've still got to do a few more years to get the qualifications in order to do what? To buy a house? No, you've got no chance of getting a house until you're about 40 or something like that. To get a good job? No, you're more likely to be working. I mean, not to say that
This
barista is a
sounds
bad job or whatever, but someone's got to do it after all. But, a job for life seems to be something that has sort of passed lots of people by now. You see people doing, the gig economy. These aren't secure jobs necessarily. Those who are in the professions are probably all going to be replaced by AI. Jobs for the future. There's no jobs in the future. It's all going to be done by AI unless you work on a forklift or something like that. But I think even in Amazon warehouses, there's those electronic robot dogs doing it all or something. Anyway, on that note, I'll leave the rest to you. I've
Yeah,
gone
no, I
off
was
on
just
one there.
thinking, you really did. But that'll make a lovely short, won't it, Martin? We can exert that and have you ranting on your soapbox. Wonderful. Thank you for that. No, that's Robinson full steam. Um, Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, no, and on that note, we should put a link to the episode that we did on assessments and GCSEs in particular, where we really talk about the fact that for these significant numbers of young people who don't get what's widely conceived as a passing grade, what is their time worth in school?
Well, Fonagy
Um,
actually makes a point here. At the same time,
mm,
an increasing emphasis on academic achievement has come at the
yeah,
expense of free exploration and play. Children are growing up in environments where structured activities dominate their time, leaving
yeah,
little room for spontaneity or independent adventures. This dynamic has likely made the transition from education to adulthood more challenging. And he also talks about that transition being later and later. So, like I
yeah.
said, my dad at 14, then it became 16. Now, for most kids, it's 18, but then 19, 20, 21, 22. You know, we're
Yeah, yeah.
increasing
Well,
childhood or non adulthood for a very, very long time.
it's a bit of a sort of hackneyed old meme, isn't it? Sort of 30-year-old children, sort of feckless and irresponsible. Whether the extent to which that may or may not be true isn't really the point, but the fact that it's a perceived effect of the way in which we mature or don't is. But then wasn't it ever thus? I still can't pick up a drill without pretending it's a gun. I don't know about you, Martin.
No, I pretend it's a drill. In fact,
Do
it
you?
is.
Yeah, no. I mean,
But
I
I've
like.
clearly got no imagination. You know, I should be out there.
No, well,
What do
that's
you do
it.
when you pick up a gun?
I don't. I'd never have.
You be careful. You might pretend it's a drill, and you can see what all
Okay.
sorts of horrible things could happen when you next go to IKEA.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one more reason to continue stopping people like me have guns. I would have
Well,
thought.
absolutely. Yeah, this is for our American
If
viewers.
we needed one. Yeah. For American viewers, don't mistake your gun for a drill
So, what
under any
what
circumstances.
what should schools do?
Well,
Should
not
they
give young
should
people
they
drills.
no
Yeah.
should we just continue this
Mm,
ever lasting, ever
okay.
lengthening educative time? You know,
So
it's
So it's really difficult, isn't it? So what should schools do? Schools, their primary raison d'etre is to provide children with an education. So the idea being that we might want to do a bit less of that is deeply counterintuitive and probably outside the remit of schools. The fact that they're and one of the things that became really, really clear to us during COVID, that one of the role of schools in looking after children so that parents could work became increasingly obvious. That what we do with children, in some ways, matters less than the fact that we do something with them. And I think lots of parents found that, and that's maybe given people pause for thought, but the fact that we are intent and schools are held to account for the quality of the academic curriculum that they provide and the quality of the academic qualifications that young people leave with means that they're highly motivated to emphasize those things. And the fact that schools are also spending time on children's well-being and mental health is despite that. So schools are doing that because they recognize the extent of the problem. They recognize that young people are in distress. They recognize that nobody else is doing anything about this for whatever reason, whether it's lack of funding or lack of opportunity, or whatever. So probably rightly, they're saying, well, if nobody else is going to do it, this is what we can do. And as you talked about earlier, solutions like mindfulness or growth mindset or whatever these things are seem cheap and easy and seem like easy ways to approach things. I've got a little anecdote. A school that I visited not that long ago. I'm not going to name it for obvious reasons, but the head teacher was telling me about a year 9 student who'd been referred, through their systems for school-based wellbeing support, and he'd been observed as having very low mood and sort of some of his behaviour being not so much disruptive, but very difficult and challenging in particular ways. And so he was asked and supported to attend some mindfulness work, and so he went to part of the school where it's all very kind of lovely and padded and covered with positive affirmations and all this sort of stuff. And he had a series of sessions which focused primarily on his breathing exercises. And what I was being told was that subsequent to this, his attendance went through the floor, his anxiety worsened, and he was refusing to go into lessons, and that the kind of the group around the child, when they were discussing what was happening with this young person, was saying, or certainly there was a groundswell of opinion that what he needed was, we needed to double down on the mindfulness and get more of that. And at that point, the head teacher was intervening and going, look, we really need to think about the fact that this is a young man who's living in temporary accommodation, that he's a young carer, and that maybe mindfulness and breathing exercises are not the appropriate response to some. You made the point that not all mental health is about having a condition. Maybe some mental health issues are responses to awful circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, and the
So
idea of trying to get
I
some
wouldn't.
status in your life, just some stability in your life, is to
Right.
say, I've got all this pressure, please don't add more. That place adds more. I'm going to get away from that place.
And I think so. The cost and various sort of various studies have looked at this and sort of explored this idea that when you have some kind of therapeutic intervention and it doesn't make things better, the kind of the logical response that you might feel as somebody in receipt of that intervention is, well, it didn't work, and that means I'm just a rubbish person. It's my fault that it didn't work. And then it would appear to be that lots of people then internalize what's going on and what they're experiencing, and feeling that it is their fault, and then that then exacerbates the problems and leads to spiraling conditions. And
Yeah, I mean,
obviously no one's intending that, but it's a pretty sad state of affairs.
there's also, I mean, with schools have become more and more celebratory places for success. Whether it be,
Okay.
we are an outstanding school, here's our
Yeah.
top students this year, they've
Okay.
got
Yeah.
through to
Yeah.
Oxbridge, they've done this. And the vast majority of students, of course, aren't involved in all that. And so what do they do to celebrate their failure? I mean, if
I
you,
don't. I think maybe that's a little unfair. I think many schools. I don't. I'm not. I couldn't say about most, but many schools do celebrate the fact that most improved student, most improved with behaviour and attitude,
but even
and
then,
those sorts
on
of
a
things
on
do
a
get celebrated.
successful day, you have been the
Yeah.
most improved student. That's a tiny, tiny thing, isn't it? Because most of the students won't get even that.
Well, maybe, I mean, and there's yeah, maybe so. And
I
one of the
didn't even
things,
get most improved student of the year award. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
I know, I know. Well, so
I
only one
didn't.
person can get, only one person can improve the most, can't they?
Exactly.
But if you're only doing it per year, then maybe you've only got yourself to blame. So one of the policies that I've seen in schools that I really like, and I can't see any downsides to it, is that staff are asked at the end of each lesson to give a golden ticket to one member of the class whose contribution that lesson was the best in the room, and then children then take their golden tickets and give them to the member of staff designated with collecting those together. And I really, really chuffed, like, I got it today. And if you're doing it every lesson, every day, the likelihood that everybody can be successful in those terms maybe dramatically increases. And maybe there's a case for that kind of thing being more common. I don't know. Certainly, I remember an experience talking to a child on the gate as they left, and they came up to the member of staff that I was chatting with and said, "I got a golden ticket," and they were so thrilled. and they were so delighted to be able to share with this member of staff that they had this really tiny successful achievement, and the member of staff really celebrated with them, going, "I'm so pleased, I'm delighted that happened for you." And we shouldn't perhaps underestimate the power of small things.
Fonagy recommends three things,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that's autonomy,
Yeah.
competence, and relatedness.
Yeah.
With
Sounds like
autonomy,
self-determination theory to me.
yeah, well, it gives giving young people the freedom to make choices, take risks,
Mm.
forge their own paths.
Yeah.
This might mean loosening rigid structures in parenting and in education,
Yeah.
encouraging independent play, and here we go, you'll love this one, fostering opportunities for self-directed learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's
there
not
are other
hang on,
ways.
it's not about leaving them to fend for themselves, but
No.
equipping them with the confidence to navigate challenges and make decisions that align with their aspirations. What do you think?
And of course we want that for you. Nobody's rational wouldn't want that for young people. It's about doing those things safely and appropriately, isn't it? I think that's it's when those things happen, at what point do we let people do those things? And what I would argue is that those outcomes where we can sort of self-direct meaningfully are a product of being successful. So if you have a good firm foundation of experiencing success, then you're in a really good strong situation to experiment with your own autonomy and competence and relatedness and all those other good things. But if you've only ever experienced failure, if every lesson in school is yet again, I can't do the thing that everyone else seems to be able to do, the likelihood that you're going to thrive when told to go off and self-direct is really slim.
Mm. Which brings us to
So
competence, I suppose. And competence, he
it
talks
does.
about providing young people the tools they need to succeed, not just academically, but
Yeah.
also socially and emotionally. In
Yeah.
terms of feelings, we had this seal, didn't we?
Yeah.
This was a big thing, social
We did.
emotional aspects of learning,
Yeah.
and
And
whether
it's all
those,
SEL in the States. Yeah.
yeah, so those, whether those things are again tick boxed ways
Yeah.
of doing
Well,
these things. But things like emotional regulation, conflict resolution, problem solving, competencies as crucial as grades, he reckons, for navigating adulthood and building a sense of personal achievement.
yeah. So the problem is there is no clear consensus. Nobody really knows how to teach those things.
No.
So it's not that he's wrong. He isn't. It's if we could do it, we would do it. But the problem is we've got those as goals. We're doing things, as we said earlier, which aren't necessarily resulting in
Yeah.
those outcomes,
Are
and
we
therefore maybe sometimes inadvertently undermining them.
are we also putting too much into the sort of realms of psychology and science and second rate science and psychology in schools
Yeah,
in that
no
these things
doubt.
actually that there's a lot of stuff in life which is
Yeah,
expressed in the arts, in sports, in the things that people do, which enable to empathize, to understand, to feel, and the importance of
yeah,
feeling
absolutely.
things
And I
is
think in
quite
some ways
important.
we overprivilege the role of things like the arts and the sports. I mean, there'll be some people who get enormous, and there's great evidence actually on the enormous well-being that comes from, for instance, gardening.
Yep,
That spending time with your hands in the soil
getting
it
involved in the
correlates
mud. It's a-
really strongly with improved mental health. You only have to talk to somebody like Monty Don, who's had
hmm,
his own demons, sort of talk about the therapeutic effects of nature. I read a really interesting study. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but recently about the role of spending time outdoors has the beneficial effects it has on young people diagnosed with ADHD.
yeah,
And the fact
absolutely.
that being outside seems to relieve them of the symptoms that they can't control in a classroom.
Yeah,
And so all of these things are important. Should schools be the mechanism whereby these things happen is a slightly different question.
they have to
I
be if they
don't
take more and more time of childhood. They have to be. I mean,
I don't know that.
I
So
know
compared
people
to
around. There's people
yeah,
around here who spend an hour or so getting to school, and
Yeah.
getting back to school, because they're on public
Okay.
transport doing this. I mean, and
Yeah.
certainly kids who are
They've made some choices there, haven't they?
the parents have made choices for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got the 11 plus, so you're going to that
Yeah.
borough, you're going to
Yeah.
Kent, so
Yeah.
you're getting on the train, blah blah blah, and
Right.
then they're doing a highly academic curriculum,
Yeah.
getting home, doing a high amount of homework, etc., in order to succeed some point in the future. And the mental health strains of that, I think it must be extraordinary.
Yes, but I don't know whether it's fair or reasonable to hold schools to account for the decisions parents make about how far children should travel to school.
Well,
From
they
my
could
own,
say no. They could say
they
no.
could
It's
say
just
no.
local, just
They could
local.
say no, but then for all the failings and the problems of my own experience at school, I had to get two buses to school. It took me
Mm,
probably an hour to get to school.
there you go.
And one of the things that I definitely felt as a result of having this being normal for me is that I was really confident about finding my way around and using public transport, and I was even given a free bus pass, which I would use
I've
to
got one
treat.
now. I've got one. I tell you, I was talking to someone the other day, and we were just saying our greatest thing in our lives
Yeah.
is our free bus pass. Free train. Look,
Oh,
I get to travel on all the trains, all the underground,
Martin.
all the
You
buses,
make old age
absolutely
sound
free.
so exciting.
It is. It's a wonderful thing. You even get discounts
Yeah.
at the theatre and everything like that. But can't recommend it highly enough. Go get to
No.
be over 60. It's
Well,
a
do
good
you know,
thing.
give me time, Martin. And
Yeah, time and the way wherewithal.
yeah.
But it also
Look,
relatedness. He talks about relatedness
yeah.
and the importance of fostering strong social connections, and how
Yeah,
much
well,
of
look,
that is possible in real life,
right.
in school, if we're reducing
Yeah,
playtime, if we have phones in our hands at school and are just
which very
sitting there,
few people,
which
very
are
few
fostering
schools do
different
have that.
social connections, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
But should we
So,
allow kids to have that? But
okay, well,
also
let me answer that.
community and friends and family, all those
Yeah.
things. Carry on.
All those things. Yeah, okay, so a couple of things. So, one, I think that his interpretation of self determination theory, Ryan and Dietschy's self determination theory, is quite narrow. And that, obviously, it's a short article.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to say about that area. And there's a lot to say about the research that's gone into it. And it's certainly true to say, one of the ways in which self determination theory is often characterized is that intrinsic motivation is good and extrinsic is bad, and that's not supported by anyone's research. There are certain types of extrinsic motivation which are really, really powerful and positive, and that schools can do a lot to harness, and that do lead to these outcomes. But I think that the main thing that I think we can really try and focus on in schools, and I think lots of schools do great jobs at this, is rather than offering interventions potentially badly, we should do everything we can to focus on schools being places of warmth and safety, places where every child is known. And I think, that I'm saying something which nobody's going to disagree with, I would have thought, but the lived experience of many or a significant number of young people is that they go whole days not really talking to anybody, not having conversations. And so knowing that, and it's the smaller a school is, the easier this is. So this is probably less of an issue in a primary school. In a secondary school where children travel to class from class to class and there isn't one adult overseeing the majority of their time, things are different. But if you've ever done pupil pursuits and followed children round for the day and sort of looked at the level of interactions they have, it becomes really clear that some kids just never speak.
Especially with that
Um,
bloke following them around all day.
yeah, especially with some ginger fella annoying them. Absolutely, and I think that working harder to kind of know those things about the children in our schools and making sure that we do uh, talk to them and we do tell them that they belong, we do give them high expectations which are matched with appropriate support, and that success is made genuinely attainable for all. I think there are ways of doing that, and it isn't easy, and it isn't something where you just wave a magic wand and teach to the top, and that happens. But there are ways of doing this that end up with children feeling more secure and more valued and more able to achieve. And if those are our priorities, maybe there's less of a need for the kind of sticking plaster interventions that we feel under pressure to give out now. But as always, doing it like this is harder and won't be solved in an inset.
Yeah, and also one thing I think, a word
Yeah,
I've used before, I don't think everyone's used it before, but you've also written about it as well as me, and that's the importance of the word meaning.
meaning.
That this has meaning, this has
Yeah,
purpose, that my life has meaning, that life has purpose,
yeah,
and the ways that schools and subject teachers can actually help
yeah,
provide meaning. That this is actually, you know, for its own sake, knowledge for its own sake, meaning for its own sake, rather than a means to an end, and all those things. That there is
yeah,
something purposeful about the day to day, the minute by minute reason. And
yeah.
here's a nugget of something that really captures you, and to
Oh, I
educate.
thought you were going to give me a nugget then.
No, no, no. But feelings as well.
Yeah,
Feelings is important. The connection, you know, that you
yeah,
have with what you're learning, rather
yeah,
than, is this in the exam, sir? You know, I think if you've got that coming at you a lot, then there's
yeah.
something failing in your lessons or in your school.
Well, let me challenge that slightly. I think that when you're in the latter part of year 11, I think that becomes increasingly
No,
relevant.
you know what I mean. All the way
Yeah,
through
no, I
from
do, I
day
do,
one.
I do, I do. But I think that these things are sometimes misinterpreted. So I think that we're generally speaking, the one of the effects of the curriculum term with Ofsted saying to schools explicitly you shouldn't be using GCSE prep materials in Key Stage 3, I think largely has had a more positive effect on many young children's experiences in schools, and I think we've got better at that. But it's sort of interesting. And one of the things that maybe we could sort of work to a conclusion with is Bex Boomer Clark, the CEO of Lift Schools, was reporting to House of Lords Committee about mental health crisis and children voting with their feet, and a lack of engagement in schools. And it was maybe expressed quite clumsily in the TES article where I read it, because it looked like she was saying, that a knowledge-rich curriculum was inherently bad for students. And she's since, in Schools Week, sort of defended that view and said that wasn't what she was saying. So that's a welcome clarification. But the lack of engagement issue is something, and I'm sure you found this visiting schools, Martin, that seems to be increasingly very prevalent in many, many lessons. That the number one thing I'm asked when I visit schools is, what do we do about the fact that children are passive passengers in lessons? They're not participating. They're not causing trouble, but unless they're asked to participate, at which point there's a certain level of hostility. And it's really, really interesting that that's the thing that we're dealing with. And I think there are relatively straightforward things that we can do to change the culture in classrooms, but for all sorts of interesting reasons, we haven't been prioritising those things, perhaps.
Wow, that's a whole new
I
episode.
know, that's next week's show. What a
There you
great
are.
segue, Martin.
It's great. So look, all you have to do is make sure you like and subscribe, and you'll
Yeah.
see this
If
come up next week.
if
What to do in
enough
the
of you like
classroom.
and subscribe, yeah, let's next week's issue is what to do in the classroom to get young children, young children, old
Young
children,
people,
all children,
old children, young people,
children,
children.
whatever age, children of any age, to engage in the classroom. And we're coming at you with that next week.
Brilliant. And on that note, bye bye.
Goodbye.